Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Always a pleasure to be there with you in spirit, if not in real form. And believe me, I am with you in spirit as we watch the third in the series of library movies, The Glenn Miller Story. Now, you know this movie was made after the events of World War II, but I always, in November, as you'll recall, had a veterans movie. And at the beginning of this movie, or the program, or at some point that's already been done, we always ask our veterans to stand and be recognized. Unfortunately, there are no more left from World War II that we know about in the area who can make it to a program. But there are Korean War veterans. If they haven't been asked, I'll just do it. Please stand up and be recognized and remain standing. Veterans of the Vietnam War, please stand up and remain standing with the others as we acknowledge you for your service. Veterans of Iraq and Iran, same thing, thank you. Veterans of the Korean conflict, I think I missed that one. Everybody still rise, stay standing, and when you're all done, let me be the first to say thank you for your service. All right, have to edit a little. At any rate, we're now going to talk about why I didn't choose a combat movie. Well, same reason. It's a movie that makes us happy. I didn't want to be down in the trenches, much as I sympathize with the great people of Ukraine. We can get enough, unfortunately, on the news today without having to worry about being in the trenches in World War II and all the sickening and death that was taking places. So I thought to myself, what are good World War II movies that do not, or World War I even, that do not cause this concern? So for a future tip, and hopefully to be shown at this library in the near future, is MGM's wonderful movie For Me and My Gal with Gene Kelly and Judy Garland. Judy was by that time in '44 a rising star, and Gene Kelly made his movie debut. And somebody noticed this guy can dance, sing, and act. And they play a vaudeville couple that go through many scenes in World War I, and he's thought to be a coward because he does something that isn't cowardly, but he takes the blame instead of someone else. He's far from it. And in that movie, it has a happy ending. Of course, we were in the 40s, and talking about World War I. At that time, it was inspirational, and he got transformed by being a soldier in the war. All right, so let's go back to our current movie, The Glenn Miller Story. So I didn't want to have anything gloomy, doomy, and warlike, and I thought, you know what? The best thing for our audience today is probably The Glenn Miller Story, starring Jimmy Stewart and June Allison, released in the 50s by Universal International with a running time of approximately 2 hours. That will be on the handout sheet prepared, I think, by Glenda and assisted by the library staff. And so when we get down to the time for deciding on this movie, what is it that makes it? Well, it's joyous, it's happy, and above all, it's a musical, folks. You can imagine a biography of Glenn Miller without music? Well, let me know, because I never would hear of such a thing. But here we have all those tunes that made Glenn Miller famous. String of Pearls, Chattanooga Choo Choo, Pennsylvania 6-5000, all of Little Brown Jug, all of those wonderful recordings. It traces the story of how the Miller Band came together in hard times, and you know, he didn't live very long, unfortunately, Jimmy Stewart's character. But they went through all of this travail and angst getting started until finally a local businessman in New York saw their talent and picked up the tab and started underwriting them, making loans. Miller went on to make millions of dollars in his brief career, which had to end tragically in the end of World War II, when, as you know, he was killed in an airplane accident while touring with the troops in Europe. He was lost in the Atlantic, and I don't believe the body was ever found, or if so, it was found many years later. This tells the story then of how his family, at the very end, the last few minutes, how his family reacted. And how do you think June Allison would react with all the joy and charm and could happen, with the happy memories, which I hope we always have of each other. And of course, we can't exclude, again, the wonderful supporting cast, too numerous to name. This is in color. It's in a vibrant color. And I've already mentioned some of the songs. You can sing along if you want to. Pardon me, boys. Is this? Well, anyway, maybe not. Then there are three things to look for in the Glenn Miller story. Number one, what is it to you that is the single thing that makes this movie the most outstanding? The number one answer for me is the music. You can't get past the music. They had music in Meet Me in St. Louis, but here we have not just toe-tapping music. Here we have music by a famous band with their original recordings. We have the celebratory music at the end of the day when they go over to Europe, entertain troops. You remember Frances Langford? Maybe not. She was a great singer. She kept living long enough to play herself in this movie, as did many other greats of the music world. So they did the tour to wrap it up in Germany shortly before he was killed. Not Germany, excuse me, in England shortly before he was killed. And she sings the old favorites like most notably Over There from World War I. The music is impossible to beat. And so secondly, I think the color is impossible to beat. The detail they went into. Every Hollywood biography is fictionalized somewhat, but they were pretty accurate in most of this movie. They had Glenn Miller portrayed as the sort he was, and Stewart looks a lot like him once you get used to it. June Allison evidently was made to look as much like his wife as possible, and all the supporting players, beginning with Sig Ruman, who was at that time a manager of a pawn shop in San Francisco, I think it was, and he gave him his first break with Hawthorne and so forth because he had faith in the band, and including so many, time does not permit. But look for Harry Morgan as his lifelong friend and assistant band manager, and many others. So it's the music, it's again the cast, the supporting cast, the Technicolor. Oh my gosh, what a knockout. Scenes on location at University of Boulder campus, University of Colorado campus in Boulder, scenes all over in Pennsylvania. All of his engagements, the large ballrooms, the revolving starlight ballroom, ball up at the top. If this doesn't bring back memories for folks from the 50s, nothing will do it, folks. It brings back World War II, not in any sugar-coated version, but in what life was like for real people. I mean, they were struggling to put a band together and to avoid being drafted and so forth, and just trying to make things work. They were people trying to live through it, and live through it they did with grace and dignity, and go on to get their reward. And the last thing I would look for in the Glenn Miller story, in addition to the music and the cinematography and all of that we've talked about so far, is how do you create a real-life character with an actor? Everybody at the time of this movie that knew anything about it would know that Jimmy Stewart was not a dead ringer. How do you do that? Well, you do that with mannerisms. You do that with what people would remember of the voice. You know how if you're talking about Uncle Silas, who recently went to his reward, and you tell a story about him, you use Uncle Silas's vernacular. You use his gestures. And what they're doing here is the same thing. What you do is work with what you've got in order to get us, and the research they put into that movie to be sure that every little gesture, as the song goes, had a meaning all its own. Every little gesture, every little emotion by some feeling can be shown, whatever. It's a wonderful song, and it's a wonderful way to get this across. June Allison and the others are perfectly competent, but what I'm obviously zeroing in on is Jimmy Stewart's ability to imitate. He always had a natural knack for filling in and imitating, ad-libbing. He was one of the greatest, born in Indiana, Pennsylvania, and rose to the greatest of heights and never lost his popularity right till the bitter end. At any rate, watch Jimmy Stewart's performance because it's central to the movie and because it's as close to Glenn Miller being alive as we will be likely to get. And so that's the story. We're ready for the movies. I do believe at the end that this also has a cast of characters to be run. And I hope that when you leave this wonderful library and this wonderful series. Stay as long as you can. Use the library. Do what you can. I hope to hear people humming along to, pardon me, boys, is this the Chattanooga choo-choo? Because as the great Irving Berlin said, it's not the whole score that makes the difference. It's the tunes you can take out of context and remember forever the indelible image they create. As always, enjoy this, my friends, and the staff, the Glenn Miller Story with Jimmy Stewart. Thank you.